All right, my name is Ryan Saunders, and I am for equal pay between the women's and men's team.
My name is Daniel Lett, and I am against equal pay.
My name is Brady Stevenson, and I am for equal pay.
My name is Justin Satig, and I am against equal pay.
I think it's muted.
Me.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, we just need Will.
Hear me? Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, cool. Did y'all hear my introduction?
No, just go.
No.
My name is Will Stallings, and I'm against equal pay.
So do we want to have the people who are against or for go first?
I can start. After reading the case study with the U.S. women's national soccer team against the men's soccer team, I read a few articles, and the women actually received their pay difference for the World Cup winning in 2019. Their pay was $110,000 when the U.S. men's soccer team received $407,000 when they won in 2018. So that's almost a 1/4 amount pay difference. So that's really what stood out for me, why I think that men and women should be paid, because that's not even relatively close to each other.
I am for equal pay because I read a Washington Post article, and the amount of revenue that was generated by the women's team, net revenue, actually exceeded the men. I think it was like $8 million compared to $2.7 million for the men. So in reality, I'm actually like a little different. I think that women should be paid more than the men in that regard. But then I read where the World Cup money, FIFA only allocates $30 million for the women, and it's like $4 million for the winning team, whereas they allocate $400 million to the men's overall prize pool and 38 million. So I think that should be outside of the pay. That's how the soccer team is paid overall. But when it's just for revenue generated through friendly competition and the World Cup, women should actually be paid more, or at the very least equal.
I'm for it along the same lines of Caroline that she said. The average pay for women USA soccer players is from 25,000 to 85,000, and you hear all these men's soccer players, and when they sign contracts, they're up in the millions. So I'm definitely for paying women more.
Anyone against it want to counter argue?
So my reason that I'm against there being equal pay is just solely income coming into the two organizations. If there's more income coming into the men's organization, regardless of where that's from, they're going to get more pay. And that's just all there is to it. That's how capitalism works. Now, these are two separate organizations. The men's and women's are not the exact same organization. They don't have the same manager. They don't have the same coach. They're under the same category, but they're not the exact same, and they don't have the same leadership. I believe that it's not right that maybe if you look at the FIFA pay, like Ryan was saying, that the men's organization is paid more, but that's not something that these organizations handle themselves. But the men's aren't going to bump themselves down to the women's pay when they're making more. It's an issue that needs to be addressed worldwide, not just within these organizations.
And I kind of agree with you on that. I feel like the attention is automatically, especially in sports, is kind of drawn to men because men are the ones who are playing, I guess, it's stereotypical, but more rough. They're willing to get hurt more. Men don't, are not having children. So it's kind of like less of a how do you say, an effect when if you do have children, it's not really affecting you in your sports career. But like you said, a lot of the attention goes to the men because they're more willing to get dirty, get down like with anything. When women are sometimes more careful in that aspect, and then also the money and economic increase that it has, more attention is drawn to the sports that kind of involve men. Not taken away from women at all, but that's kind of where the attention is.
Yeah, I kind of agree with both of you guys. I read an article through Forbes. I don't know if you guys are big soccer fans, but most of these players that play for the U.S. teams, they play international soccer and club soccer. So most of the time, you're getting paid from your club team, and you're getting a salary from them. And then on the men's side, from the international team, they're solely playing, or they're solely getting paid off of bonuses from the U.S. National team, whereas women are getting paid salaries from their international teams and from the club level. This was an agreement that the women actually made. I'm not sure in what year, but they made this agreement that they would get paid salary from the international team, whereas men only get bonuses from the international team, which I don't really think is right. But that's just an agreement that women already made in the past, so I don't think that it should necessarily change.
If we want to go back to people who are for equal pay.
So in regard to how much the is actually the money that's generated by the two teams, it's actually under one organization, and it was like $101.3 million, and it's difficult to actually ascertain who was responsible for generating that much revenue, besides just like they saw increases during the World Cup in 16, they saw increases during the Women's World Cup the following year. But it's really, they suspected that the revenue generated through these sponsorships were basically evenly divided. And then when it came to jersey sales overall, the women's home jersey was actually the top gross selling product. So with that in mind, I mean, I actually think women should be paid more than the men if we're talking about that one organization where the revenue was either evenly distributed or the women were actually responsible for generating more revenue than the men. Then at the very least, they should be paid equal.
And also what Daniel said, you mentioned something about how like the coaching is different and stuff, but I read something that said Becky Sauerbrunn, I think that's her last name. She said a quote is, "They're not only providing equal pay, but also improving the training and playing environment for national team players." So not only are they just giving them equal pay, they're also giving them equal opportunity and resources.
I understand like where you're coming at with the whole 400 million, like your prize money. Like you have 32 teams compete for 400 million in the men's, and you have 24 teams compete for 30 million in the women's. And I feel like that if we took down some of the men's soccer team, and then we advertise and emphasize more on a women's soccer team, we would have more views and be able to pull in more revenue to be able to pay them more equally.
So one of the issues that unfortunately do exist is that the women's soccer team probably is more popular amongst Americans all around. The issue is the men's soccer team gets the coverage of the other foreign soccer teams a lot more. So a lot of people in other countries, they're not really watching the women's soccer like the Americans are. They're watching the men's soccer. It's huge all around the world. It's the biggest sport. So when the United States plays Spain, they're getting millions and millions and millions of views, or even billions of views for the men's team and very few for the women's team. So although the people aren't watching for the US team, they're bringing in a lot of revenue, even though they're not nearly as popular as the United States women's team.
kind of looking at it as a whole, we are kind of emphasizing on soccer, but what about WNBA or other sports that are, televised on TV? There isn't an official like women's league for football that I know of, like that is televised and everything. But a lot of the main popular sports, at least here in America, like football, basketball, stuff like that, a lot more of the men leagues are pulling in more money than the women. So I guess question for the people who are for equal pay, do you feel like taken away from sports, like in terms of soccer, I meant, and taken away from soccer, do you guys feel like as a whole, not just looking at soccer, but looking at all the sports, that women should be paid the same as men or higher?
Well, I think the easiest comparison is the WNBA and NBA. And I think as it sits right now, probably not necessarily, but I think the NBA shares a responsibility in trying to grow the WNBA game. So if they could set aside some of their revenue in order to increase compensation to at least make it more equitable, even if it's not necessarily equal, and just because a lot of the facilities, a lot of the I guess like accessories that they have is not nearly to par as the men's game. So if they could allocate a certain percentage of their revenue, the NBA, not necessarily the players, then it could help grow the WNBA game so we can be in a more equitable state.
And do you think by doing that, people would, like, I guess, watch and be more in tune with that?
I don't think so.
Oh,
I mean, I don't know the exact numbers on it, but you look at a WNBA game, and there's not nearly the crowd that there are at an NBA game. Just because you get better facilities and stuff, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to bring 20,000, 25,000 to an arena every night like the NBA does.
that's true. But if you increase the facilities, and not just in the WNBA, but also increase the money allocated to like youth sports, in particular women's sports, then you ultimately increase the level of competition there as well, which makes it more intriguing overall. And then also if you have the NBA back in the WNBA game for more TV rights, because how often besides the WNBA playoffs do you see a WNBA game on TV compared to an NBA game? It's not very often. And I understand that they have to demonstrate that they're going to receive this public support, but I mean, it's not possible unless they have, the backing of the NBA and at least some of their revenue to support them on a bigger and larger platform than they currently are.
Well, if you bring it back to soccer and also with the WNBA, we do see that women's sports are rising in popularity, and there's no doubt about that. And that's great. I support that, but I don't think that institutions should try and match the pay yet for the men and women, because the men are still so far ahead on viewership, and you've got to support what's marketable while it's marketable. Yeah, of course you should try and grow the women's division, but you have to invest where you're making money and not just
each individual scenario. Like, yeah, the women's team does better than the men's team does in the U.S., but with other scenarios, you can't just give them money out, because if they're not profitable at the moment, then there's no point just wasting that money.
Also goes into putting money in for the resources needed to be successful, not just a team that's not successful compared to the men's team, just paying them even for that. But if you're paying more for the resources used to become successful, then that's a different story.
and I agree with that. There should be a equal investment for resources. They should be on an equal playing field, 100%. I just don't think that the salaries, I don't think we're in quite the space yet for the salaries to match up until we can get that level playing field for viewership as well.
I feel like once you get that level playing field, then it'll create a competition which will be higher and drive more people to go into that industry, which then will create a higher salary, which is why we should go ahead and start investing in getting everything better. And I mean, the men's soccer team should definitely like recommend or start helping with the more views towards the women's soccer team so we can go ahead and increase their salaries over time.
And I definitely believe that there is potential there for the women's soccer team to continue to grow because, like I said, if you look at the American side of it, Americans are watching women's soccer more than they're watching men's soccer. It's just they're more popular. The only issue is it's the foreign countries that are bringing in that American viewership for the men's soccer. And I do want the women to grow and get on that level playing field. It's just not there yet.
And then I kind of, I mean, if you think about it, you like somebody mentioned, you're going to put money where, you know, it's going to bring you back money. And it's easier to say, yeah, we could fund here, put money here to grow this industry. But it's harder to say it when it's your actual money, if you know what I'm saying. It's easy to give somebody else's money away than your money. And I feel like that's why it's so easy to say, yeah, funding for the women's league is something we should do. Just
Well, I think the argument can be made that if you like grow the women's game, like at its core, you're going to increase viewership by women. Like the main sports in America right now, it's not like exclusively watched by men by no means, but it's predominantly viewed by men. So if you grow the women's game, it actually will in time grow your game as well.
The thing is, it's just that's going to take time is the only issue. And I agree that we should eventually get to that point. It just is going to take time. And we're just not there yet, unfortunately.
This is the first sports team to agree on this Equal Pay Act. So in the future, I can see other sports like other Olympic sports like swimming and diving or any of those sports that are popular within both genders. Those could be coming up next. But I do understand other sports that don't bring in a lot of revenue for the women's teams. But I do see in the future other of these popular women's sports coming and agreeing on this act too.
definitely.
Just a warning, we're at about 15 minutes. So do y'all want to kind of get to our closing remarks?
Sounds good.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. We want to start with the supporters of equal pay.
Well, ultimately circling back to soccer, I think it can be demonstrated that, at least in America, that there is equal popularity between the teams, if not more on the women's side. So just putting the World Cup to another spectrum, right, outside of the conversation. If we're just talking about the equitable salaries of the men and women's team for the 4 years that are not involved in the World Cup, the women, because of their popularity and sponsorship and being the #1 jersey sale, should at the very least be making the same year annual income as the men's team.
I'm in agreement with Ryan on that. I believe that with our popularity inside of the U.S., we should be able to pay women the same amount of pay.
And I think I'm sorry, did you have any?
No, I'm good.
Say, Caroline? Okay. Just kind of what we said. And I believe everybody who is against, not necessarily against equal pay, I feel like as a whole, we view the women in sports as, you know, something that's going to grow and something that's going to thrive and succeed. But just as everything, we know everything in the world is full of business, and you're going to put money where you're going to gain profit, the most profit out of, and it's like a cutthroat, you know, world. And yes, the women's league and women in sports are going to thrive, but like Justin said, it's going to take some time for it to happen. And I do believe that women will get equal pay, but like I said, like Justin said, it's going to take some time for it to happen.
All right, I think
For the specific case of the men's and women's team, the soccer teams in the U.S., it makes sense for the women to get pretty much equal pay as the men. But as far as other scenarios like basketball and other sports around the world, it doesn't make much sense because at the end of the day, most men's sports are more profitable. So like you just said, it makes sense to put money where you're going to make more money. So it's good for the soccer scenario, but for the rest of sports, you can't just force your hand on that.
at the end of the day, I believe sports is business, just as much of a business as Apple or Google. It's about making money. At the end of the day, it's great to do what is right for society, what's right for your players, and I support that. But a business is there to make money. It's there for success, and you can't obtain success if you don't make decisions that can sometimes be hard. And I just believe that these soccer organizations or every other sports organization should make efforts to get towards that equal pay and equal viewership. I just agree that it's going to take time. And one day we will be there, but we're just not at that point yet. Was I wrong?
Caroline, did you give your final remarks?
Yeah, it's I just think it's a great step in our world, in America, not just in the world. And I think it's going to be a common thing in the future, and I can see this happening pretty quickly with other sports.
All right, I think that's it.
Okay, well, I
Thank you,
appreciate
Ryan.
everybody's opinions, and